Welcome to a Homegrown Family Podcast, where we grow the produce and the kids. Hey everybody, welcome to a Homegrown Family Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Metler, and boy, have I got one for you here today. It's a little different than what we've recently been talking about, but I think many of you will find it very interesting. From the hospital, to their car, to their very own house. We're talking about the birthing experience of several of my nephews, my brother Sam and my sister-in-law Andi. So here we are today. Welcome aboard. Thank you guys for joining us today.
Evening, Joe.
Hi, Joe.
Hey. So like I mentioned, this is kind of a little bit different topic than normal, and I hope some of you will find it very interesting. I think personally I'll kind of find it interesting because, you know, my brothers and I don't necessarily talk about these types of things, especially birthing. You know, it's not really part of our status quo. You know, talk about hunting and fishing and stuff around the farm and things like that. So, and it's also kind of interesting because when we get together in large family groups, you know, there's 30 plus of us, you know, 20 grandkids alone. So I don't always get all the interaction, you know, solo or one-on-one with some siblings and things. So this could be an interesting conversation to have. Let's start off with just a quick little introduction to you, Sam. You are middle of the road, right? It goes my sister, me, Dave and Michael, like a 5-year gap, Sam, and then Lawrence and Nicholas. So he's pretty much in the middle.
Yeah, I'm fifth in line, and I guess we'd call us like the last three. You know, we kind of had some things where like we maybe worked a little less on the farm. We got more spoiled, some of the older brothers would say. But I'm fifth. I'm 5 years behind Michael. Joe, you're 9 years older than me.
Something like that. No need to age ourselves here, Sam. No need to age ourselves.
So I graduated high school in 2016. I went to NDCU, North Dakota State University, followed my brother's footsteps. But as far as the major, I did not. I went for broadcast journalism and a minor in sociology. My hopes were to maybe video or do some radio things for sports. And that was my kind of dream job in high school. But things changed rapidly. I met my wife, Andi, in college through the Newman Center, and that's where we met and realized that I needed to set my priorities straight there and follow a different career path. And now I am a rural carrier for the Postal Service. I'm a mailman, and I am also a part-time youth minister in central Minnesota.
So basically, actually, that was Sam's nice way of saying when we met, I kind of said, that's a dumb idea to go like that. I wasn't always super nice with Sam, but I said, that's not going to provide for a family. And if you want to get married to me, you have to provide for a family because I want to be a stay-at-home mom. And you'd have to live in a city to do broadcast journalism to do well enough to provide for a family. Mm-hmm. And the hours were just not family-oriented. But pretty much I had a frank conversation with Sam, so he sacrificed a lot for our family, I would say.
Yeah, I was looking forward to seeing him being there. The next Paul Allen of the Vikings. And he goes, touchdown!
And he's loose.
I get to still use those a lot during Viking games on Sunday with Sebastian and being goofy, I think.
He sits there watching the Vikings and living in his glory days.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, funny. Yeah, how about you, Andi? You went to college as well, and you also...
Yeah. I went to college in Moorhead. Yeah, well, I guess. I sacrificed by going to college. I probably didn't want to go to college, but I didn't know if I would meet anyone and what God's plan was for me. And dental hygiene is a 2-year program, and so I decided I wanted to go for that because it makes good money and short amount of school time. And that was my kind of... I feel like my parents really... they didn't pressure me, but like encouraged that because I wanted to go for music actually. And they said, if you want to be a stay-at-home mom, you're going to end up being a music teacher and making no money, going 4 years of school. And then if you're just going to switch over to being a stay-at-home mom anyway, like that doesn't make a lot of sense. So if you want to work and just try and make some money, like to save up before you get married, look into some of these like tech school or like more trade school type things. And so dental hygiene is like was one of them. I also looked in like sonography and some other stuff like that. But I ended up with dental hygiene in Moorhead. Yeah, and then I met Sam at the Newman Center. We got married. I'm one of
my
7.
basement.
Yeah.
Yeah, we slept on a twin bed for a year in Joe's basement.
Yeah.
I still don't know how you guys did that.
First year of marriage, we slept on a twin bed. We could have gotten a bigger bed. We were just too cheap to do it. And it was really good for our marriage, too. But, yeah. So we lived with Joe for a whole year. And Joe, talk about sacrifices. Joe put up with me. Those were not some of my best years, like, mentally or spiritually. So I feel like, yeah, kudos to Joe for living with me for a year.
Worked out. And actually, kind of a fun, interesting note. I made note of a couple times, and one recently too. Here, I was thinking about this podcast. Was I lived with my brother David in college. What was it, like a year? We overlapped in the same apartment, and then I moved off to the west coast there for a little while and things, and then I moved back to NDSU, and then that was when Sam was at NDSU, and then so he lived with me for a year, and then Lawrence lived with me for a year, and then this last summer, my brother Nicholas lived with me for the summertime while he's working and taking a break from schooling and stuff during summer. So I lived with every single one of my brothers except for Michael. So Michael's the only one missing out.
Yeah, I got
Yeah.
I did relish in those moments a little bit. Maybe we could have taken more advantage of it, but it was nice to, as you said, you were the bottom 3 or like the, of the family members and stuff. So it was nice to kind of, because I was out in other states here when you guys were doing high school, and so I missed a lot of your glory days, right? So it was kind of nice to kind of catch up and reignite some of that brotherly relationship there with those guys. So yeah. But so we kind of know about our family. Andy, you mentioned you're one of 7, and yeah, why don't you describe your family real quick, and yeah, then we'll get into the birthing process here, folks.
Yeah.
Almost going into the birds and bees kind of thing, but we'll skip that part and go to the end.
Yeah, they probably don't want to hear about
Who
that.
birthed you?
Yeah, so my mom and my dad, they birthed me in Colorado. So I was born in Colorado, and I lived there till I was 8, and then moved to Minnesota, and then lived Kimball for the rest of the time. And now we're back in Watkins, which is not far from Kimball, Minnesota, obviously. Yeah, I'm one of 7. I grew up Catholic, and I would say a pretty tight-knit family, though, and we all see each other and get along. And yeah, I grew up with my dad. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and then my dad is on a family farm with his brothers, so they do beef cattle. Yeah, Angus beef cattle, black Angus beef cattle.
She's probably rubbing it in my dad's face there a little bit for a second. He'll probably listen to this later, but
Yeah. Exactly.
So kind of getting to it then, what all our listeners have been waiting for, because I was debating on whether I wanted to have this episode on this podcast or not, and a homegrown family, and one of the components is being family, right? And so how you raise your family, eventually Nora and I will kind of hopefully get into a little bit of that, and what kind of educational systems you do, whether it's homeschooling or classical or Montessori or things like that too. And I think those individuals who contemplate those types of things in life are probably also contemplating, going to give birth in a hospital and kind of doing what some might call typical, not necessarily traditional, but typical of the current society. And, you go to the doctor, you give birth in the hospital, and, that's kind of what happens. But you guys have had a unique situation where you started with that, and then, you had 2 other different situations afterwards. So why don't you go ahead and kind of talk about how you came to the decision to just do the hospital thing, and maybe just because it's just the thing you do, and then what your experience was with that, and then we'll kind of work our way from there.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, we actually had planned to do like in a birth center with a midwife in Brainerd. There was like a midwife who had her own house. So it wasn't in your house. It wasn't like a home birth, which I really love that idea, that it's in a house and it's comfortable. It's with a midwife. I've always wanted to do that, but they didn't take our insurance, and it was going to be $7,000. So I did all of my pre-care with her, and then I realized how much money it was going to be, and I'm like, oh crap, we can't afford this right now. As much as I really wanted it, it's just $7,000. We just couldn't, we just couldn't do that. So I said, okay, Sam, we need to look into our options. And we decided on
kind of a compromise, I guess, because I was a little unsettled about doing a birth center or a midwife, just because our mom is a nurse, aunt's a nurse. We have relatives that work in hospitals, and yeah, so I was kind of hesitant there. So we decided to go to Staples, try to do a water birth there, and they're one of the few hospitals that would do water births, and they had a midwife also in the hospital that we could work through. And they took our insurance. So being newlyweds, the financial aspect of it was a big reason why we decided to do the hospital, mainly because we could afford it.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that you guys were trying to do more of like a home style thing the first time around. Tell us a little bit more about why did you have that desire, and how that desire come about to do more of a comfortable, or what you kind of saw as pros and cons or whatnot.
As far as just like doing home birth in general, like why I wanted to do that.
Yeah, because it sounds like you wanted to do that from the beginning.
Yeah. Well, actually, I wanted to have a home birth, which I don't know if you know this about me, Joe, but I wanted to have a home birth since probably I was like 12 years old. My mom never had a home birth. All her births were hospital, but her last kid, she wanted to do more natural. My sister Ava. And so she's kind of really into that, and like birthing positions and getting into positions that help you birth versus like laying on your back. And then she showed me this video called The Business of Being Born. And it just talked a lot about like how the hospital, it's like a business, and it tends to push things upon you. And like it talks a lot about like the high cesarean rate and the low cesarean rate of a lot of midwives. And anyway, it was just very interesting. And I think the biggest thing that I saw that I liked so much as a young girl was how empowered the women were. They like could do this and like go through all this like birth is supposed to be really painful, but like they went through it and they were just like, I don't know, kind of like heroines to me. So I was like, I want to do that. And they even talked about like getting like this sort of euphoric high. And I thought that also sounded cool. Like when you give birth naturally, because don't have the pain meds. I think another reason, which I don't think is a good reason, but I think it is a reason, is I'm kind of a control freak, I would say a little bit, or I struggle with control. And so if you have an epidural, you can't feel anything from, your legs down. And if you're on a bunch of meds, I feel like there's a loss of control there.
A little bit of vulnerability, right?
Yeah, even like C-section, like that all freaked me out from that sense. As like, I wanted to stay away from that. I wanted to be in control. I don't think that was a good reason to choose, to choose.
Part of it's you don't want anxiety while you're there, because I'm sure it's not helping the process.
Yeah. But I mean, no matter what birth you do, whether it's a C-section or a medicated birth or non-medicated birth or home birth, you're never in control. So it was kind of a dumb reason, but it was also, I think, a reason why I wanted to do unmedicated.
I'll post that video in the show notes here, a link to it or something if I can find it, or maybe you can shoot me a link and I can share it. It'd be interesting to listen to, because I know my wife Nora, she tried to go into birth, with our daughter. We just have the one. Trying to do more like a natural with just not using, a epidural and things like that. But after 3 or 4 hours of pushing, she's kind of like, all right, I'm done. Hook me up, And in the end, she's kind of like, yeah, I'm not doing that without an epidural again. She's like, that's what she's, planning on doing. But for her, it never really crossed her mind not to be in a hospital, because she went to school for neonatal, practice. And so she knows the worst of the worst that can happen to babies while they're in the hospital. So, she's seen the worst things, where if you're without oxygen for 8 seconds, you start losing brain cells and things like that. Or, not to freak people out, but there's those cases where that happens. And so Nora's kind of like, yeah, nope, I want to be within immediate assistance. And so for her, it's never really a question of not being in a hospital. So Nora and I have never really had that conversation of, oh, what do you want to do? Do you want to have a home birth, Sam? I never got that awkward discussion of, I don't know. Do I want to give birth in my house?
Yeah,
It's
no.
kind of always just been a given for us that, Nora said from the beginning that she's going to be in a hospital. But
Which is interesting too, because what I think is, so I gave you the reasons why I wanted it, but then once I had Sebastian in the hospital, it actually gave me more reasons of why I wanted not to be in the hospital, which has nothing to do with, because I like the idea too. I'm the same way. I think of Nora. I want to be close in case something bad happens. I really love that. But unfortunately, I do feel like the hospital system, and it depends on where you go, but they do push a lot of things on you. And so I had a horrible experience with Sebastian and Philip, actually, even though Philip wasn't born in the hospital, with both of them. Just like, I wouldn't say horrible, but kind of just like that sense of like they didn't care about what I thought at all. And they didn't want my best interest at heart. Now, if I felt like the hospital system did want your best interest at heart, I think that would be maybe the best situation. Or like a birth center, where people could go and they'd be right by the hospital, but it's like homey, but like right next to like where if something went wrong, you'd have all these things available. But anyway.
yeah, I don't know. Our experience was relatively pleasant, other than that they dislocated her tailbone, or or what, or she'd break it. I don't remember exactly, but yeah, it's just she had to have a donut, sitting for a donut for a while, getting up in the middle of the night, feeding her little girl and things. So that was not very comfortable, and part of that was due to positioning, right? And so now we know better that that's not going to be the way we're going to position Nora's body during labor. So I thought that could have been a little bit more helpful that way, but Nora's also a very medically educated individual, so she kind of knew what she didn't want and what she wanted, and so she wasn't afraid to just like voice her opinion, like, no, this is not what we're doing, because I know the side effects, I know the results of this drug, or this and that. Not saying that you weren't educated, Andi, but so I think it's for Nora, it was more of like the fear of being away from something if something did happen, knowing that she works with the worst of the worst.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And no, that's true, because you have to be able to speak up for yourself if you want to have an unmedicated natural birth. And I'm bad at that. And especially when I'm like in the middle of labor pain, and I'm like want to do the best for my baby. So if someone's telling me my baby's heart rate is kind of off, so like that happens for Sebastian. They said, oh, his heart rate's off, so we want to have continuous monitoring, which I didn't want. I didn't want continuous monitoring. I just wanted them to monitor him on and off. But of course, I freaked out because I'm like, his heart rate's off. But really, that was just probably contractions, because contractions are hard on a baby. But anyway, I couldn't get into the positions I wanted to be in, because you have to be still kind of and in one position with the continuous monitoring. And so my labor just was horrible and painful and sucky for most of it with Sebastian. And I screamed through probably most of my contractions, which was not fun. And it went well. His birth went well. And, I came out without any major things, and so did he. But that was kind of the negative in that, of like, it really did push me hardcore to get the continuous monitoring. And I didn't want it, and they didn't really respect that I didn't want it. And so I was like, I don't really want it. And they're like, yeah, you need it. And then, I don't know, that whole...
Well, part of that might just be some of the insecurity of the nurses present, too, because they're used to having somebody monitor, like a monitor going all the time, so they don't know if something's wrong. If, it makes them feel more comfortable knowing, having confidence in those cues, and things like that. But Nora actually had a similar thing where we're trying to birth in a different position, but with the contractions and everything, the baby's heart rate was going down because it wasn't tolerating that particular position very well. And so, we had to like switch it up a little bit too, due to some of that and everything too. But yeah.
Oh, interesting.
What was your experience of the birthing in the hospital, Sam? Besides not sleeping because the beds suck.
I don't remember that part of sleeping.
Sam could sleep anywhere.
So my job with the first birth of Sebastian was to take pictures, and I felt like I wanted to be a little bit more involved, but I wasn't quite as involved because there was that more monitoring of such stuff, and just like felt like I would maybe get in the way of the nurses and doctors if I would speak up and be like, hey, is there something I can do? Or Andi was in pain, and so she was just like more mad at me if I would try to do something. Or
yeah, Nora was like practically biting at the nurse because she's like holding my hand, the fingernails are going in, and then she's like and just like biting like motions at the nurse kind of. But
yeah, if you're, I don't know, it's not fun.
yeah.
No, what's interesting doing water birth, one of the things you don't think about is that one of the nurses is designated to go around with a net and collect all the poop that floats to the surface from Andi.
Hey, that's a known secret, Sam. Don't tell women they poop, okay?
Yeah, actually that was, it's like of all the things of birth, you think of all the kind of like super personal kind of things that might humiliate you about like how you look and appear during birth. And that was the most humiliating for me, is when you can't help it, and then you've got poop floating on the water, and you're like, great.
And you were apologizing.
I was apologizing mid-contractions. That was my attitude, which is so dumb, but that's where I was at that time. I was like, I'm so sorry.
and we just gave birth like in the bed or whatever. That's what we did. But same kind of situation was like, Nora's like, don't tell me if I poop. I don't want to know. And in the end, she's like, did I poop? Like,
Yeah, that's maybe the hard thing about water birth is like, it's all out there in the open. There's no hiding it.
Right, yeah. And any blood or anything like that, it's all there, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the water birth part of it was really cool. So, the monitoring stunk or whatever, and like the hospital, like, room, like the lights and like the floor, like the whole area that you have to give birth in. I don't like that. It makes me like kind of anxious and not super comfortable. But the water part was really, I feel like, neat to watch. I feel like Sebastian be born in, and because you can hold them underwater and they know not to breathe until they come out from under the water.
Yeah.
That's just kind of neat to just like hold them under the water for a little bit and just kind of like see them, and they like have no awareness that they've been born yet, but they are. So that's kind of cool. And they don't cry, and they're just kind of so comfortable, and then you can just kind of slide them onto your chest. And then as soon as you take them out of the water, they're like, oh, I'm born. So that part it's kind of surreal, I guess.
That's interesting. Sam mentioned that it's kind of how he was going to get in the way because there's only one side of the tub. Or it's like I didn't feel like I was quite in the way as much because I had two sides of a bed. And so there's always one side of the bed they weren't really working on.
They actually brought in like an inflatable pool.
Oh, it wasn't like actually like a tub. Oh.
No, it was like a round thing where they just poured water in through a hose and like heated it up to a certain temperature and stuff. And yeah. So I mean, I could have, but I just felt like my memory was just there were so many nurses in there. It's like.
And Sam could have got in the water too.
I was gonna say he could have put on a swimsuit.
That's the option, but Sam was like,
no. I didn't really. Yeah.
Sam was grossed out.
I didn't want to get too close. Yeah.
He did not want to be in there with bowel movements and blood and other things.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd do that either. Nor told me that I wasn't allowed on the downside of the bed.
Yeah, and that to each what makes them comfortable.
Right. Yeah. One thing I would say, and I don't know if you guys experience this with some of your birthing situations, is that so sometimes as a man, you don't really know exactly what to do or when to encourage or like how to encourage. Maybe that's the lack of preparation. But there's times where I was like, hey, yeah, just breathe, Nora, just breathe. And then other times, it'd be like the nurse that's there would just step right in, like, all right, breathe with me. When you're doing all this stuff, and I'm like, I feel like I'm supposed to be the support person. But obviously must not have prepped on how to coach Nora how to breathe, or whatever. So the nurse kind of like stepped in, and maybe that's a little different prepping with a midwife, because then it's the same person you're prepping with the whole time process and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I guess I didn't think about that too. That's one thing I really like about even in the hospital, like you're always going to be with, unless she's somehow sick, she always will be the person who, like, so even in the hospital, that's how it was. Like she was the one who was going to give birth. which I guess that's not always the case with OBs. Like, if they're not on shift, someone else will do it. Is that right? Yeah.
Yep. And actually, if we would have given birth before midnight, our OB would have been on site. And then if it was after midnight, then it was going to be a different nurse. Or it was like 4 in the morning or something. Whatever their shift change is, it was going to be a different nurse. And it was the one one doctor that Nora did not want present, because that doctor was typically known for C-sections and quick cutting decisions and stuff. And so Nora's like, no, I don't want this doctor. Other doctors will be less likely to tell us when they start cutting. They'll give you a little bit more time, or they'll try to, maneuver things or whatnot.
Yeah, which I actually feel like that's a good lead in, maybe if you're ready to like fill up.
Yeah.
Birth. Yeah. So anyway, we did that whole thing in the hospital, and we decided to go to the hospital again. I think just because I felt more confident that I could like maybe say no to like the continuous monitoring and just labor, but then felt like insurance wise, I think it was probably money wise again that we just wanted to go that route, and lack of midwives in this area. We were just like, I have no idea. Like, we didn't know any midwives in this area, and we just like, we hadn't been in this area too terribly long either, and so we just like didn't know, I think. So we were traveling 2 hours.
Yeah, so Staples was hour 45 minutes away from where we were, because right before Sebastian, we moved down to Kimball. We moved actually from Kimball to Watkins right before Philip was born. So we decided to do the same hospital in Staples. I'm driving, and
not yet. Maybe so we decided to do the hospital, and we're driving an hour and 45 minutes, like for all our OB appointments. So, I mean, we kind of liked the person there. It wasn't like we just hated the whole experience, is maybe my point. But anyway, go ahead. So now it comes time for birth. Is that what you were getting into?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now
I want to hear the story. I don't know if I've quite heard it myself.
Yeah. Now I'm in labor. We're ready to go. Lawrence was actually with us at our house when I went to labor.
That's right. Yeah, Lawrence was staying the weekend. He was at our house. We're like,
I don't know if I knew that, but he might have been the one texting people saying, hey, Sam and Andi are heading to the hospital or something. Maybe, I don't remember.
I think so.
And I knew I wanted to labor as long as possible at home and not at the hospital. And so I was starting to go into labor, and we had worked a lot more with like Sam doing like hip pushing and like helping me like work through like pain management and like anyway. And so I just remember like being like on our couch, like kneeling, and Sam pushing on my hips and going through contraction, and like Lawrence was still here and like not getting out of the house. I'm like, Lawrence, can you please, we're gonna have to probably go to the hospital soon. And I think he was excited. I don't say that against him, but it was funny. I was like, Lawrence, get out. I think I was thinking that in my head a little bit because I was in pain. And anyway, he didn't quite get the hint. And another funny thing is, well, yeah, we had thought like, it's a 2-hour drive. Maybe we should put towels in the car just in case. Like, I don't make it the 2 hours, but we're like, no, that's not going to happen. So we didn't put towels in the car.
So obviously our audience is going to know based on what we're going here, what the end result is going to be. But yeah, in the car. So if you're driving on the highway going like 65 miles an hour, trying to get to Staples, we just come out of St. Cloud, which is kind of like the halfway point. So we made it an hour, and then Andy's like, I got to go to the back. Like, these contractions are getting a lot harder. Got to go to the back. And then she kind of curses at me a little bit because I put the luggage in the back seat instead of the trunk. Then she has to move all the luggage to the side so she has ample room in her little Impala car. So she's crouched over, having contractions, laboring. And I'm still just driving away like, all right, hopefully we can get there in time.
And I did not curse, by the way. Okay. I didn't actually curse. That's a little bit of a falsehood there.
Sam was under a lot of pressure, okay?
I'm pretty sure I was like, oh, shoot, I guess that is cursing, kind of. But anyway, go ahead.
And then Andy's just like, I'm having the baby. Like, we're going to be having the baby. And then I'm like, oh, okay, well, start dialing 911 and then realize that, like, oh, she says the head's out. Then I start to pull over. So it was just like 2 hard pushes that were really hard. And then
I had 2 really hard contractions and then 2 pushes. And yeah, Philip was born. Yeah. And it was, I didn't even really push. It was actually kind of a cool thing. It was just like 2 contractions that just pushed him out. And it was actually really it was my favorite birth because it was so easy. Like, everyone always is like, you don't want it to be fast because it'll hurt way more during like when you push. Might tear. And maybe that's true for some people, but for me, I think this has a lot to do with Philip's head size. He had a small head, but he practically fell out, and it was like super nice. It was such an easy labor.
The question is, Sam, were you able to catch it? Did you get pulled over in time?
No, I mean, I did say that the mailman helped deliver the baby. Like, the mail was the only thing that he delivered. But Andi caught Philip by herself. Like, I think I was just stopped almost by the time Philip was born. So it's kind of crazy. Like, you expect to be really panicked, really like distraught when you're on the phone with 911 and you're delivering a baby. But we were surprisingly calm, and that was probably just like Holy Spirit, God's grace. Yeah. But it was cool just like talking to the dispatcher, like, yeah, all right, what do I do? Like, oh yeah, do you have anything to tie the umbilical cord with? I'm like, not really. Well, take your shoelace, tie the umbilical cord. So that's what I did. So I had just one shoelace on.
What do they want you to do with the shoelace?
Tied around the umbilical cord.
To like clamp it shut?
Yeah. So when you cut it.
Because in a hospital, you would normally have a clamp or something to clamp to stop the blood flow, right? Is that why
Well, eventually, once all of it goes through, they'll tie it.
Yeah.
And then you cut it. And so I probably, if I would have thought about it, I wouldn't have had you tie it, because you really want, like, you want the blood to completely be done flowing to your baby before you cut the umbilical cord. Yeah. But I'm sure I was just like, whatever, I don't care.
It did take a while for me to actually get around.
Yeah. And
time you got the lace off your shoe and
yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so.
Yeah, and then the fire and rescue were the first people there from Rice, and then the first thing they did was give us a little stuffed teddy bear, like, before really checking on Andi or.
They didn't even see if me or Philip was okay. They just like set a little teddy bear there. I was like, oh, okay.
Well, I mean, you guys were on the dispatch. You're probably like, hey, dispatch, we got somebody who's nervous. They just gave birth to the baby in a car, but it's already out, so get over when you can.
I'm sure they hear a lot of really bad things too, so I'm sure they're always happy to see, like, you know, a baby and a mom that seem, you know, healthy. And one cool thing about that is, in a birth perspective, that was, you know, here I am, you know, again, I pooped all over myself in my pants.
Okay, car.
Yeah, we had it detailed. I did not clean that one.
Yeah, we did get that one cleaned. You know, from the waist down, I'm completely nude and just kind of covered in blood and stuff. And these people come and they're just smiling at me and happy and just congratulating me and like helping me. And it's the most dignified I've ever been. And there was maybe a couple women, but a bunch of them men. And you could just tell by their eyes, like, how they were looking at me. They just really cared about me and wanted the best for me. So I just felt super dignified in that moment too, of just like,
you're super vulnerable there, you know, and it's like everybody's just smiling. Yeah, I could see that being way different than the hospital. They're like, hey, congratulations, here you go, and they're unplugging their machines and doing their own thing again. Yeah,
it was just really beautiful, because I wouldn't have expected that. But yeah, that was kind of cold, like getting out of the car, because we took an ambulance then to like the St. Cloud Hospital.
It was February. Yeah.
And it was February. So like getting out of the car into the ambulance was, not so fun. So really beautiful, fun experience, but it's interesting. As soon as I get into the ambulance, the whole thing kind of went downhill. So like as soon as it became a medical thing, it kind of just like, So the first thing is, and I get it's like a safety thing, but as soon as you get in the ambulance, you cannot have your baby with you anymore. They didn't have a special harness. And so Philip, he had no clothes on, and he had to be put in his carrier without clothes on, and be put away from me. So I couldn't even see him for the whole car ride to the hospital, which is like at least 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And he didn't cry the whole time. I think that had to do with his genetic disorder, but he just wasn't crying, wasn't making any noises. And so that's not good for any mom and baby to go through.
When Sophie was put on Nora's chest, Sophia wasn't crying right away. And from Nora's perspective, she looked a little blue. So Nora's like, why? Because the babies are supposed to be crying, right away. And she's kind of like freaking out. I was like, why is she not crying? Why is she not crying? She blue? But she had swallowed some embryonic fluid or something like that when she was coming out. And so, but yeah, so Nora was a little bit worried about that for a second. But yeah.
Yeah.
And the main reason they want them to cry and stuff is that they have that stuff cleared out. Otherwise, they probably do have something.
Yeah.
In their throat or swallowed something.
So what was the reason that they wanted you to take the ambulance? I mean, you could have just popped back in the car and drove, right? I mean,
we could have. I think we were just worried, like, to make sure everyone was okay. I don't know why we did it. It was because it was expensive. That was a dumb decision. I don't know why we made that decision.
You remember how much it cost?
Oh.
It costs like $3,000 just for the ambulance, yeah.
Because it's $1,500 for me, but $1,500 for Philip.
Yeah.
Too. It's like a double.
Mm-hmm.
They charge for each person.
Because each person is technically under medical care.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So that ambulance ride would have cost just as much as it would have been if we would have just given birth in the hospital. Total.
That's nuts.
I think insurance did cover a good chunk of that.
Yeah, of course.
But but it's always like you see what it face value of what that costs, But oh man.
Yeah, it was like our daughter had some febrile seizures too, and one happened at daycare, and they called the ambulance, and I wasn't there, so I didn't know how serious it was or anything, and so then I got there, then they're getting ready to load her in, I'm like, all right, well, I'm coming with, kind of thing, but I wasn't underneath medical care, but it's still like $1,000 or $2,000 to bring Sophie there, when I probably could have just popped her in the truck, because at that point she was just kind of like out of it. She wasn't really actively seizing anymore, but yeah, that's crazy. It's expensive.
I think we asked how often, like, people give birth, like, in cars and not out of the hospitals on their way, and they're like, oh, yeah, well, it's pretty rare, but we've had, like, 2 this week already. It's like, what is going on this week?
Yeah, it was.
It wasn't one of them twins?
Yeah, one of them was twins, too, that was born in the car.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Talk about crazy. But yeah, anyway, for whatever reason, we decided to take the ambulance, which was a dumb choice. Got to the hospital, got into the room, and a midwife, actually, like a hospital midwife, comes in, and I hadn't delivered my placenta yet, partially because I've been sitting. I haven't been able to stand and move around, and I haven't had time to bond with my baby, which is a huge part of delivering your placenta, is the baby bonding. And so she comes in and is like, oh, I see you haven't delivered your placenta. Oh, we have to do something about that. And she looks at a nurse and says, put her on Pitocin. She did not even ask if I wanted to be on Pitocin or if there's any, she didn't ask me. She basically told them, do this. And I said, oh, and this I had learned, I was like, whoa, do I need to go on Pitocin? She's like, well, you haven't delivered your placenta yet, so it really needs to come out. And I was like, can you check or see, can I try a different position, not laying on my back, because I was laying on my back. And so she's like, well, I'll just check. And so she checked, and my placenta was, right there. It just needed, a little bit of help coming out. It didn't. I just needed to stand up, basically, and it came out. So that was, number one. And then the second thing is I had some tearing, but very minor, superficial tearing. And I didn't want to do any stitches or anything if it wasn't needed. Stitching can help with bleeding. And she's like, well, you really do need stitches because you're bleeding. And I was like, well, is there anything else I can do? And she basically was like, well, I guess, no, I think you should get stitches. And a nurse said, well, maybe could we try putting some pressure on it and see if that stops the bleeding? Like to the midwife. And midwife's like, yeah, go ahead, that's fine. And so the nurse did that and my bleeding stopped. So another option you can do with the placenta is kind of like push on the tummy, but she didn't want to do that because she wanted to get to her next patient. So hence why she wanted to put me on Pitocin. So anyway, that was just kind of a pretty bad experience about like, all these guys just made me feel the most dignified in my life. And then this midwife who's a midwife and, supposedly supposed to be more natural and helping me to have a more natural birth is just trying to put me on Pitocin without my informed consent or my permission. So it's just interesting.
Yeah, so it kind of just all depends on the situation you're in, the personnel that are working with you, and everything that make you feel comfortable and all that stuff. So, I mean, you go to a hospital, you never know what kind of bag you're going to get. Maybe get a little bit more comfortable if you're working specifically with a midwife that you'll have. But then you have instances like this that happen that are unplanned and, all that type of stuff, right? So those are your two first birthing experiences. And then you have the third, right, is where you actually were at your own house. So can you describe that a little bit more for us? And yeah.
I think that had a lot to do with our decision to have an at-home birth. Is prior we were in, a family, or like we were in a rental house before, so we didn't maybe feel quite as comfortable doing a home birth in someone's house that wasn't ours. So that was a big part. Was just we had our own house, so that was a big part of just doing a home birth. And then after having a car birth, we're like, okay, well, car birth is pretty easy. I think a home birth might be just as easy, and it will be, I don't know, in a sense, safer than having to drive and maybe having to stop and deliver and then going to a hospital in that regard.
It's a lot cheaper actually to do a home birth too, isn't it? You don't have a lot of the.
It is overall, but no, it's not, because insurance doesn't cover home birth because it's technically, more risky, so insurance won't cover it.
Mm-hmm.
Or they see it as more risky, I should say. So, no, it ends up being more expensive for us, if that makes sense.
I mean, it was comparably the same
as
what it would have been prior.
What was it, 3,500?
I think so, somewhere around there. 3,000.
3,500 for all, like, pre-birth and post-care. She does visits up to the 6-week visit after too, which is nice. Anyway, so we found a midwife. That was the biggest thing, because there's not many midwives around here, and they're pretty booked up. I think home birth is just becoming more of a popular thing, or like people are being more open to it, maybe just because of certain bad experiences they had, or I don't know why that would be.
And we knew friends, or like knew people too that were home birthing in the area, and like the midwife that we chose was actually someone who just helped a birth of one of our friends that we knew.
Yeah, so we got her, and actually through my women's group, one of the ladies in my women's group had given a home birth with this midwife, and then a lady from the church that I used to go to in Kimball, she kind of works with Sam. She had just done a home birth with his midwife, so that kind of like helped me to know, like, oh, this is not some just like lady off the street who's, she's saying she's a which, they have credentials too, but like it helps me know, like, she's done this well. And then you can ask,
she's not fresh. Yeah.
You can ask her how many births she's done, and ask her if she's had any, infant deaths, and how many transfers she's had to do. And so it's kind of cool to hear all like those different stats too. And I think the car birth put Sam more at ease too, from a medical standpoint, of like everything went pretty well there, and it was a healthy pregnancy, no complications. So if we have a healthy pregnancy with no complications, why couldn't we do it at home with the help of someone? And she's a certified nurse midwife, and so, which I was just learning more about this. So you can be a nurse midwife, but you can also just be like a certified midwife. But even certified midwives who are not nurses can administer like drugs if you're having a hemorrhage through like needles, and they can put in IVs. And so it's not like they're just like these ladies who come in and like help you give birth. Like they do have medical knowledge and can, are trained to save your life and save your baby's life if there's, any medical issues. Like my midwife had told me, which was really cool. She's very upfront. She's like, yeah, I've had to like resuscitate babies. And it's not fun and it's scary and it's rare, but it does happen. But it also happens in the hospital. It happens both places, and I can do it. And I've saved babies' lives doing that. I think she had one baby die, and that was after the birth. It was like a couple days after the birth, and it wasn't really related to her care. The baby had issues. So it was cool just to hear her own experiences. So, yeah. And so we did that and prepared with her. And she was just, she came to our house, which was really awesome. So I never had to leave, which was great with little kids, because doing prenatal visits with 2 other little kids and, Philip kind of being, more like having the special needs or whatever, especially, that was so nice because we're in the comfort of our home. And yeah, and she just spent time like really making sure, like I had some bleeding at the beginning of my, at my pregnancy, and I thought I was miscarrying. Like I had a decent amount of bleeding and fluid, and so I was almost positive I was miscarrying. And so she had me right away get my progesterone levels checked, which a lot of doctors won't do unless you've had 3 previous miscarriages. I don't know why that is, but they won't. A lot of them won't.
I don't know if that's true for all cases, because Nora's kind of been working on some progesterone levels too here, and that was after the first one. So
I know it depends on the doctors, or some, like if you don't know to ask, some won't recommend it. So anyway, I just thought that was cool that she brought that up right away of like, let's check your progesterone levels because we don't want you to miscarry. And they were low, and so I ended up getting to go on progesterone, and it's cool. She gave me different options, so it wasn't just like you're gonna do this progesterone. She said, oh, you can go on like this synthetic progesterone, or you can go on a bioidentical progesterone, which is more like what your body produces. And she also gave me just options. It was cool. Like she's like, do you want to do like this vaccination, or do you want to do like the glucose testing? Do you want to do it, or don't you want to do it? I thought she was very fair in how she presented information. I don't think she was like, I don't know, a midwife who was so like, you have to do everything natural, which was a cool transition of like, she just presented me the information and let me decide, me and Sam decide, which I love. And I think that probably had somewhat to do with like her nurse, her nursing.
You just get a little bit more experience. Maybe she was a nurse in an OB for a long time or something, or yeah, that little extra experience from sure does help.
Yeah, I just like the idea of like presenting and letting people decide instead of trying to like sway maybe one way or the other. But yeah, that birth was I didn't like it as much as Philip because it wasn't easy as easy. Felix had a much bigger head. But the whole thing was just really peaceful and really quick. It was only 5 hours from start to finish, from when I started laboring, my first contraction, to his birth. So, yeah, and I think that a lot of that had to do with my freedom to labor comfortably around my house in positions I felt were good and like that my body was telling me to do. So, whether that was like squatting or walking or deciding to go sit in the tub. And it was really cool. My midwife, this was kind of how I wanted it, but I said, I don't really want to be coached unless I seem to be in a lot of pain and I'm not getting through it well. Like maybe like suggest a position to me. But otherwise, I want to be kind of left alone, like me and Sam, because I think a lot of noise and stimulus make pain worse for me. And so anyway, it was just cool. She left me alone the whole time. So for my 5 hours of labor, she didn't do, I think they did one check. She didn't do anything the whole time. And then things were amping up and I went into the bedroom and they heard me making some groaning sounds and they said, I think the baby's coming soon. And they walked in and the baby was born Felix was born maybe like 5 minutes later. So it was cool that they could just tell like how I transitioned and I changed. They could they could just tell by my noises I was making, which I thought was really awesome. Like they didn't do any cervical checks on me or anything, barely any monitoring, and they just like knew. I don't know. I love that about it. Just like they didn't even tell me to push. I just knew it was time. And I don't know. Really, it was really just beautiful. And I say all this. I don't ever mean to be down on hospital birth or medicated birth, because I feel like you need to do what you need to do for your, yourself and what makes you most comfortable, because it's such an intimate thing, giving birth, and such a powerful thing that you have to you should never feel coerced no matter what decision you're making. So you shouldn't feel coerced like you have to do a home birth because that's the best way. You're like, no, you should decide. You and your husband are the only one who can, along with like prayer and God, are the only ones that can make that decision. So
yeah, one thing that kind of stuck out to me there was that you mentioned that the person there was actually there for the delivery of when Felix was coming out, was there the whole time. Whereas like in a hospital setting, it's usually like 2 to maybe 3 nurses, or 2 nurses and some assistant of some kind or something, that are there for the whole entire laboring period. And then oftentimes, we got to do a shift change, and so you got 2 new nurses all of a sudden if it's a longer labor, and then it's like, I think we're really close, I'm starting to see the head, call a doctor, get her in, and so the doctor's literally, like, our doctor was there for like basically to catch the baby and a couple stitches, and then she was gone. Like literally 15 minutes is what she was there for.
It was kind of cool because our midwife was actually like sick. She had some viral thing that like she was just like down and out, and like she like fell asleep.
She had a huge kidney stone that was causing. Right. She had a huge kidney stone so she was out, and so I think people maybe who are not for home birth, like, well, what do you do if your midwife is out? But
she had a backup midwife, or someone who's training to be a midwife, or was she?
No, she's a midwife.
And she had this Amish midwife as backup who came with some pre-op stuff, some pre-op appointments, and was there during the birth as well. And so she was kind of like the secondary person, like doing like checking on Andi a little bit more than the other midwife, who was having kidney stones and having just as much pain as what Andi was having, which is really crazy.
Yeah, that's kind of nuts.
And for me, like the home birthing experience from my side, I felt like I was a lot more involved. It was really cool to see Andi just walking down the hallway like an NBA basketball player preparing for their basketball game. They're just walking the baseline. She was just kind of doing that with her headphones in. She wasn't really jamming to rap music. She would have some like lo-fi or some praise and worship music on.
I'm just picturing you over there on the couch like, and here we go, we have another contraction. 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. Oh, any day now, we're going to make it to the end zone. Here we go.
Announcing the whole time.
Yeah, no. Yeah. I was just silently praying my rosary at some points, and then I would, every time she'd have a contraction, Andi would call me in quick, and I would just push on her hips. So I was very involved in that process too, and it was really great for me to be able to do that. And like Philip was still with us too, so I was just like able to play with Philip while Andi's giving birth, just like walk around, do some stuff around the house.
But in the moment, then at the end, like when the birth's actually happening, I suppose all the adults are kind of in the bedroom or whatever, but you had that secondary midwife that was maybe keeping an eye on kids. Like, what were you doing with the kids also in the last second,
Andi's mom came down when the labor was happening, so she, at one point, did she just take Sebastian outside, or was Sebastian with your dad?
Yeah, Sebastian had gone to my parents' house, and Philip had stayed here with my mom and Sam.
Okay.
Is how that worked.
Mm-hmm. So eventually she took Philip outside for a walk.
So
just around the
block.
block.
And then when it was time for birth, so I was about to give birth, my dad came in with Sebastian and my sister, and they're like, I think she's about to give birth soon. So everyone was in the living room, and I had a designated birth spot, though, because I knew people were going to be around, like family, like, because I knew the kids were going to kind of be involved in the process, or hoped that they could be. And so I had my own, like, kind of separate area. So basically, when it came time for birth, it just happened honestly so quick. I kind of wanted, like, I didn't care if Sebastian saw, but I was like, kind of wanted my mom to witness. And so I think they just kind of all stayed in this room and didn't even realize it was happening because I gave birth really quietly. I didn't make a ton of noise. I think they kind of heard me grunt louder. And I think my sister Ava was like, I think the baby, like, I think I hear something. But then the baby was born, and like a minute after, like kind of after I had just kind of sat back, got Felix on me and gotten a little bit of the blood kind of, put away for Sebastian and whoever else's sake, like 2 minutes after, like Sebastian was able to come in and see, and my dad and my mom watched the birth too.
No, and the umbilical cord was actually wrapped around Felix when he was born, and the midwife was just like, and it was just like 2 seconds. It was really quick. It was like, dang, all right, because Felix is like blue coming out, and then just like real quick. And
that's also a really cool thing too, because I know that's a big concern of a lot of people. Like, what about the, umbilical cord and how to do that? And it's just amazing to see how like the midwife was just. She said that umbilical cord that being wrapped around the neck actually happens quite often, and so it is very good to be trained, whether you're a doctor or a midwife working in the hospital, to be trained to know how to slip it off the neck as they're being born, or even to kind of hold back your pushing so you don't just push it and then make kind of a noose for your own baby. So just kind of interesting in that way. But yeah, she didn't make it fearful thing though, like, no. Oh, it's wrapped around his neck. Oh, she didn't freak out.
No,
she just kind of slipped it.
She didn't say anything. I could just see that it was, and then she just.
Yeah.
And another funny thing was, so people from our church or in our little neighborhood knew that, the time was near that Andi would give birth anytime now. So then people can start seeing cars lined up in our driveway from the midwife. And then so one person who lives in town that's friends with Andi's mom and us, like, saw that there's cars in there and that Robin, Andi's mom, was walking around. So she like started walking with Robin and was like, oh, is she giving birth now? It's happening right now. It's so cool. And then like our neighbors across the way too were like, oh, I was wondering if that was what was going on.
That's funny.
Yeah, and then that night we all got to sleep in our own comfy beds and
that's
not
probably
our
the best part. That part was so good.
That was nice. I actually slept in like the birth room with Felix on my own. And Sam went back to his own bed.
Yeah.
I don't know why I decided to do that. I think I was just.
That bed's just smaller. Too.
I just didn't want to move, and I was just kind of tired out. Mm-hmm. And that bed wasn't. As we slept on a twin bed when we were married, we didn't want to deal with the full bed that I gave birth on. But anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. It definitely puts a little bit of new perspective on that. So it's really interesting to hear some of this perspective you guys had on all the different. I could share some of the experience when it comes to hospital births, but then when you're talking about more of the home birth type stuff or the bath births and things like that, then I'm like, oh, interesting. So yeah, that was interesting. Hopefully some of our listeners got some of that information and maybe guide them in making their decision. Who knows? I don't know.
Could have made this longer. There's details we left out, but for the sake of your listeners.
That was like how?
So we could wrap it up a little bit, I guess. If there's something that you wanted to share yet that you would like to, or if there's maybe a favorite part for Sam in the whole thing, whether it's in any of the births that you had, what was kind of like what's that memory that sticks with you?
Yeah, I think the memory that sticks with me is just like Andi being most comfortable at home giving birth, and like also being able to communicate between each other and be on the same page of what we want our home birth to be like. Just the whole process of Andi being comfortable and doing what she was able to do, and me being able to support that in a lot of different ways. The most vivid memory is just her walking down the hall, and all I can just imagine is like brother Mark on the wrestling mat, just walking back and forth before every match, like he does. All the wrestlers do that.
Yeah, which is a cool thing to be able to see your wife confident and not scared before birth. And let me tell to all the listeners, or even to Joe, like, I'm about the least confident person out there, of like, I have very little, I think I probably can't do many things well, and I'm not confident in my capabilities. And so to be able to give birth, unmedicated, and to be able to go through every contraction and not feel like it was, I can't do this. That thought never came through my head with Philip or Felix. I can't do this. I don't know. Whether that happens in a hospital or in a home, that's something that's worth like finding and like fighting for, where you feel confident and you feel like, and also too, just like, we didn't talk a lot about it, but like the spiritual aspect of like finding God. For me, it's hard to do that in a hospital, and it's there's some really powerful, intimate spiritual moments with like Jesus coming into my birth that I experienced, and I was able to tell Sam about, and that's also just not something. And same with the car birth of just like praying and then having that peace. Again, something that's worth fighting for and wanting for your birth, and not accepting anything less than that, and not letting people give you less than that, I guess. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this is a great, valuable lesson, like redemptive suffering. And he was able to offer up her labor the whole time and pray for people while she's doing that. And I think that helped, ease the process too, and help her labor mean something, I guess.
Yeah, I can see how you could be a little disconnected if you're in the hospital. You're kind of, you're always getting monitored. You always have something else going in your mind. You're looking at the monitor. They don't have like a free brain in a sense to just be there. And
it helps when you have crucifixes in your house, and like you have like, Andy had a little like bookshelf where she had like a little like kind of mini altar of like icons and stuff that she was able to focus on too, and like help her pray during labor.
You mentioned the hallway thing. I'm kind of thinking to myself like, all right, did Sam turn on the music? Dun 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 dun. Final countdown. Dun, dun.
Good one.
That would have been a good song.
I feel like if Nora ever changed her mind and wanted to do like a home birth, I'd be playing that sucker. The whole stinking neighborhood heard it.
It would be real annoying at first and at the end.
Some people like that music when they're getting close to the end, but it would drive me nuts. I'd about kill someone if I had amped up music. I need calming. I don't even like music when I'm in labor. At the beginning stages, maybe, but not at the end. I'm like, everyone shut up.
Oh, yeah. One thing I picked up from this conversation, too, is that you guys had a lot of forethought and communication up front, too, that in order to make this possible, whereas perhaps in a hospital situation, you're like, hey, you talk about what's going to be in your go bag, but you don't necessarily talk about what's going to happen at the hospital because all the hospital staff take care of it, right? You talk about your birth plan, and they might have a birth plan, and the birth plan might be, I don't want this, this, and this, and that's about it. There's not a whole lot of cultivating of conversation that takes place perhaps in that situation as compared to, hey, we have to prepare a room, to do this in. We have to get somebody to watch our kids, which happens anyways in the hospital probably, but, you have all that stuff. So, interesting. Yeah. Any last final thoughts?
Yeah, thank you for letting us talk about it, and wanting us to be on your podcast. I hope somebody thinks it's interesting as I do.
Let's give Andy some 5 stars here, right? Come on, give on the ratings. Here we go. 5 stars here, 5 star there. Leave a comment. Andy's so brave.
Yes, for all those guys out there, this is actually especially for you because men need to be involved in their wives' birth. They need to. It's supposed to be that way. So
So feel free to rate the podcast, leave a comment, download the episodes. If you'd like to hear more about Sam and Andi, feel free to say so. I might delete that part because that sounded really lame. But feel free to leave any comments. I'll definitely share with Sam and Andi any comments that you guys provide. In the show notes below, I'll show a link to that video. I'll try to do that. And then also in the show notes, there's a link that says support the show. It brings you to a webpage that says Buy Me a Coffee webpage. If you'd like to donate $5, $10, $1, whatever you want to do, help keep me up late at night and record these podcasts. So be the first to do it. I do the episodes for free. It's just one of these things that I can capture some family moments, whether it's with Uncle Bernie or my grandparents. And in this instance, it's with Sam and Andi having a deeper conversation that we don't always get. So maybe one day Felix will find out that he was jamming out to the Final Countdown. I'm just kidding, but so yeah, it's kind of cool. So thanks for sharing, you guys, and thanks also for listening to the podcast. I know Sam does that on his meal route, so so yeah, all right, thank you everybody, and till next time.